Clever,
compassionate,
questioning,
consultative,
convincing,
convicted. Rob Rinder. Malud, Malowed, Malive. Rob Rinder and Drive on Talk Radio.
Good afternoon. It is 6:04. You're listening to me, Rob Rinder, on Talk Radio, the home of common sense and of great British values. We just had some breaking news. The Metropolitan Police will appeal against a High Court ruling that it breached the rights of organisers of a vigil for Sarah Everard with its handling of the planned event, the force has said. That's going to be very interesting. We'll follow that story, and I, in due course, will get a legal specialist. I have to say, I think they're going to have a fight on their hands in the High Court. And I'm also reading some of your SMSs as they come in, some of the text messages, and you never know what's going to come. It's a really interesting one. Robin, P&O Ferries, 40% of the holdings is owned by a Russian company. You should check this out and give it the light of day. These sackings, giving what they are to me, have Russian fingerprints. Well, I don't know whether that's right. It's alleged. You've put that down there. I will be exploring that further. No doubt other news media will be doing the same thing. I'll certainly be looking into it. I have to say, if 40% of the holdings is owned by a Russian company, there will need to be an investigation, and there are powers under the proceeds of crime legislation to even freeze the bits of that company if it appears that there are Russian beneficial interests. So it's a thoughtful text, and I'll be following it up. And you never know who's going to get in touch with you. Somebody's just texted and said, Talk, Rob, I think we were at college together, Woodhouse, mid-90s, Mrs. Edge. Do these names mean anything to you, Rob? And the answer is yes. Madame Edge. She taught French. I seem to remember giving up French, but merci for your phone call, Madame Edge. I'm not sure if it's you. I remember you had a very lovely daughter who was very good at the piano. Now for something completely different, a little pivot from Madame Edge and Finchley, where also Michael McIntyre went to. We're going across the pond from Finchley to Washington, stateside, with our own Prof. JC, Professor John Christopher Beer, White House correspondent at Real Political News. As ever, it is a gift and privilege to hear from you. And I also want to thank you and your great wife, who over the last week, whilst I was standing at the Polish-Ukrainian border, was giving me not just, well, brilliant help, but above all else, helping people who were on the odd occasion asking me the question about where they might get help to obtain sanctuary in America too. So you will thank your brilliant wife for that. You know, I've been denigrating lawyers on my show, but, you know, sometimes they come up trumps, and I think your wife is one of them. So pass on my thanks, Prof. JC.
It's amazing that she'll even have me, but she's sitting right here. She's my field producer, and she always goes over everything I'm going to say, especially when I speak to the likes of a judge like you.
Well, that's very, very wise. Now, we've seen President Zelensky address the European Parliament. We saw him in extraordinary scenes address the UK Parliament. This is a man that 5 years ago was a stand-up comic and has now galvanized the courage of a nation in Churchillian terms. He's become the embodiment of the pride of the Ukrainian people, and he's addressing Congress. What has been the response to that?
Well, you know, when I teach my media training, I use my 8 points. And my first point is know your audience. And boy, does this fellow know his audience. He went from the House of Commons to the Parliament in Canada to our U.S. Congress, and then he went to the Bundestag to speak to the Germans. He had a different message for each one. And, you know, he was invited where only world leaders like Winston Churchill, South African President Mandela, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, I'm reading this, His Holiness Pope Francis, and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II were allowed to speak. And he was brilliant, and he affected the president so much. But I'll tell you, when he spoke to the Germans, he kind of chided them for still dealing with the Russians. Right. And he said, which was very poignant, he said, the motto, never again, is worthless if you are still trading with the Germans. Now that had to sting. Yeah. And I mean, excuse me, with if you're dealing with the Russians, sure. Your motto, the motto, never again, which we all know. And I want to commend you for your absolutely breathtaking and your tender mercies coming from Poland. I followed you with my open heart and my open mind and open soul. Wow. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks so much. Coming from you, Prof. JC, that means a great deal. You know, I keep talking about this, but I had a very interesting expert on before on talking about his book about the fall of Kabul and Afghanistan and what this means for the recalibration of the West. It's a really fascinating book. I'm going to get you a copy. And one of the things I think the book reflects on has been the division in the West, sometimes over petty issue, but perhaps especially in the UK and most particularly in America, which has in many respects never been more polarized. I wonder whether looking at that address and the response of Congress, this perhaps represents a new moment in American politics in terms of Democrats and Republicans certainly moving together in some kind of coherent joint view of foreign policy.
He tore at the heartstrings of the Congress. They all stood up, gave him a standing ovation, and they all came together, believe it or not. One or two, and I won't mention them, who literally sat there on their hands. But this is the old guard who believe in making America great again. And it seems like Putin is trying to make Russia great again when he did that rally with supposedly 100 billion people. And we wonder how he went to this rally with all these people, but he won't sit in a room with some of his same advisors. A little manipulation, perhaps? I don't know. But America is coming together. They are suffering a little bit at the gas pump, but it's nothing like Sweden or Great Britain or Denmark. We don't pay anything, and we shouldn't complain about that, because when we see the little children that you're saving from this horrible tragedy and taking care of them and nurturing them, and hopefully they'll go back one day, especially the orphans, we appreciate that. We're heartfelt people. We care about the life of other people. And to be honest with you, and this is going to sound really cruel, Americans look at these middle class people, European people, in there with their luggage and their rolly luggage and their beautiful coats, and they say, wait a minute, that looks like us. That's very deep and very concerning. There's a racial tint to that, of course, but we look at that and we think that could be us, and that's kind of the reality check that we're dealing with it here in America.
And I sort of wonder if there's a deeper question, whether there will be a recalibration of the West, certainly a real kind of deep reflection about America's role in the world in the event that there is some semblance of peace. Difficult to predict now, but I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, I think America is finding her new self again. And I think we're finding, let's make America compassionate again. And I have to give credit to Joe Biden. He was very moved by Zelensky's speech. He was moved so much that he went and put another couple of $1 billion on the Barbie for him. And also, he made an off comment. I think he's a war criminal, which wasn't an official comment, but it was picked up by some of my colleagues in the press corps.
Right.
And he sort of had to walk that back. But then Blinken, his Secretary of State, said, no, I watched it too. And this man is he is causing this kind of
well, he's undoubtedly, I have to say, dealing with international. No. I have to say, I knew what you were getting at, Prof. JC. It's one of the things we watched an indelicate president. You notice how diplomatic I was there previously. Trump saying things and spouting out all sorts of things on Twitter. This is a person whose very words have the capacity to change the world and influence markets and change decisions. So what a president says is absolutely critical and has serious legal and international ramifications. Yes. And using the term war criminal is extremely important because it may, and this is why I suspect President Biden was worried, trigger various responses by the UN, or rather obligations in international law to go and protect people from war criminals, and consequently force the hand of America to act in a military way. So that's why I suspect he was nervous and tried to row it back. But your Secretary of State was entirely right to stand by those comments. I think you'd agree with me, looking at both the Rome Convention born out of the Nuremberg laws, that waging aggressive war, which is raiding a sovereign nation, invading a sovereign nation with no cause belli, with no cause for war, is as straightforward a war crime as possible, as is shelling innocent women and civilians. So, I mean, I don't think there's any difficulty with what President Biden said.
I agree, and in the world of international law, he was a little cautious when they brought it back, walked it back. But I've used Holocaust, I've used genocide.
Genocide.
I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
This is a genocide.
We have to be careful about that,
babies
though.
and civilians.
We have to be careful about using that language again. I mean, you'll remember, actually, it's a chilling thing, but during the Rwandan genocide, the State Department spokeswoman, it's worth watching, was extremely cautious about not using the term genocide, because as you'll recall, that would have triggered the international community under the UN Charter to go and act and go and save the Tutsi people. And as a result of her not using that language, the Americans failed to act, as did the rest of the West. The French are especially culpable, by the way, and that resulted in 100 days in the killing of 1 million people. So we do, language does matter in international law. Can I just get an insight from you in this regard? As a America-phile, I try to watch news across the board, and there does seem to be, both in this country, but especially in America, much more on mainstream channels, all be them not network channels like Fox, the growth of kind of conspiracy theories. And people, for example, like you might say, like him or loathe him, Tucker Carlson, who seems to take a much more kind of pro-Putin view than anyone on the mainstream media or any of the syndicated networks here.
Well, we journalists and White House correspondents, and many of my colleagues are actually in country, and some who know people who were actually killed and assassinated, basically. Right. We don't take pride in knowing that some of our journalists can be, in fact, shown every night on RT. And Putin has said, let's get more of this guy. I won't mention his name because I have too many friends at Fox and so many people I love. But we know that he's being seen on RT, and they're using him as a bit of a promotion mechanism. And I think it's unfortunate. I don't know what's going on with him. I remember him when he was actually a decent guy years ago, but I don't know what happened. I don't know what his story is, but I will say this. We have to put up with all of it because in America, as in Great Britain,
right,
we have freedom of the press, freedom of speech.
Sure.
You have Ofcom, which is probably a good thing. We don't. And you're smiling. And we're going to have to grin and bear it. And we just hope, as Joe Biden is staying away from this no-fly zone stuff, because he does not want to be a president who is engaged in a nuclear war because he's afraid it could turn into World War III. Now, I have news for some people. Don't you think we are already involved in World War III?
Well, that's generally been the message from the Ukrainians that I've spoke to, the idea that we're next and that you can police a no-fly zone to get aid in and to, frankly, show the strength that Putin really only understands, and it's the threat of World War III and using the nuclear trigger that is precisely what Putin uses to bully and cow the West away from taking action, which is something for us to consider. Prof. JC, as ever, we could talk to you for a very long period of time, and eventually when we get you over here, we will have a special half hour, maybe longer, with a Prof. JC cocktail. It has always been delight and informative. Looking forward to speaking to you soon, and thanks so much. That's Prof. JC, White House correspondent at Real Political News. You're listening to Rob Rinder here at the home of Common Sense on Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of Common Sense.
Talk Radio.